All right, welcome to NahamCon. I am happy to kick off the talks today as the keynote speaker. My name is Jason Haddix. I've been doing offensive security for a ton of time, and I have a lot of content today. Hopefully, it's good, and we're going to launch right into it. All right. So today's talk is the Bug Hunters Methodology Application Hacking V1. Um, Basically, I have been doing the Bug Hunters Methodology talk for quite a while, and it got too big to fit in one presentation. So we have split it off from recon to application hacking. So my disclaimer to start the talk today, my talk specifically, is that many people can teach, alert XSS, right? And they can teach you basically how to do, SSRF or any of these other, bugs. But less people teach you about how to approach applications and where to find the bugs and give kind of their tips and tricks for saving time. And so, although it's called the Bug Hunters methodology, this is really a collection of my favorite tips, tools, and tricks, and even some mantra stuff that I talk about in this presentation. And hopefully, it's useful to you, and you can use it in your day to day as well. So, like I said, I am a hacker, basically almost 2 decades of offensive security. This is me and my kids, and happily married. I'm a gamer. Sometimes I stream. Currently playing Destiny, Path of Exile, and Dota. And so, yeah, this is it's my life. It's hacking, gaming, and family, basically. And let's see here. So I talked about it before. I have this series of talks called the Bug Hunters Methodology. The last one was version 4 and had a lot of recon stuff in it, a little bit of application analysis, and it was already getting 2 hours. And so basically, we wanted to split it out, or I wanted to split it out so that I could focus specifically in application analysis in this version of the talk. It's been a long time coming because of COVID, and that really hit my family pretty hard twice. And so, yeah, so I had been putting it off for quite a while. So here's the agenda for today. So we're gonna do a little bit of like a getting started section for newer people. This talk is intended for mostly like new to intermediate hackers who are getting into offensive security, but also there's some tips and tricks in there for the seasoned veteran as well. We're going to talk about mental hurdles to testing. We're going to talk about pre-manual testing and automation. We're going to talk about content discovery, and then we're going to get into the probably the biggest section, application analysis. So let's get started. So beginning your journey into hacking, right, in your journey. So I'll attempt to give you tips and tricks and tools related to testing, but there are a bunch of holistic texts out there to supplement, your hacking journey. And so the, what they call the Bible of web hacking is really the Web Application Hackers Handbook 2. Everybody who's doing web app assessment should read that book at least twice, 3 times if not. I've read it, many, many times. And then there's some others that I really like too. Real World Bug Hunting by Peter Jaworski. The OWASP Testing Guide can give you a great, methodology to follow. Bug Bounty Bootcamp by Vicky Lee is a newer one, and I liked that book as well. The Hacker Playbook, and then a couple more: Breaking in Information Security, Hands-on Hacking by Matthew Hickey and Jennifer R. Curry. And then the other two are by Alex Thomas, the Bug Bounty Playbook 1 and 2, which are very similar to this talk, but text-written resources. I like them as well. So if you are a reading type person, these are the resources that I would say that you should grab. And sometimes they go on sale through various means. And so, yeah, you can grab them. Also, beginning your journey in hacking, there's a ton of resources out there today. And in 2022, there's just like more than ever, right? I remember when I started doing this, there wasn't any. There was hardly any. Like all we had was like Crack Me Bank and stuff like that, which was good, but is nothing like it today. Today you have Pentester Lab, which has graciously sponsored the conference. And inside my presentation, there are hidden 3 coupon codes for Pentester Lab to get you free membership, 2 for 1 month and 1 for 3 months. So keep an eye in the slides; they're hidden, and stay all the way to the end because that's where you'll find them. So yeah, so there's a lot of labs today to basically do application testing, right? And so Pen Tester Lab is one of my favorites. Hack the Box is another favorite, and Web Security Academy by Portswigger is also amazing. Web Security Academy is actually the one I recommend to most people to like kind of start with like burp and stuff. Pen Tester Lab has is like such a diverse set of challenges as well. And then there's also some other resources that you can look to in they're cheap or free. Vulnhab has over 400 crack me's. I think this number has grown. I put this number on the slide a long time ago, so it's probably more than 400. But 400 crack me applications to practice on, as well as there's a project for OWASP called the OWASP Vulnerable Web Applications Directory, and basically anybody who puts anything on GitHub that's a vulnerable application for people to test application security skills on. They try to put it in this directory on OWASP. It has over 180 applications to practice on. One thing here that I really like about the bottom two is they're absolutely free. And also, uh, they require you also to set them up, which I think is kind of a core prerequisite that a lot of people skip over nowadays, right? And so these are applications that you have to install the web server and install the application, make sure it's configured right. Sometimes it's an ISO, so you have to deal with, standing a VM up or something like that. There's components of networking in setting them up or even sometimes hacking them. And so I think that those are really cool to kind of cut your teeth on when you're learning too, is understanding how to set up the servers and everything like that. So a bunch of great resources for anybody getting started in application security. So also beginning your journey, there's like a lot of content creators now. There weren't a lot of these back when I was coming up, and so these are some of the content creators I really respect and like. There's Daniel Miessler, Stoke, who is today's MC. You've got a lot of people on here, who are amazing and willing to share their knowledge and who are consistently giving back to the community. You can follow them on Twitter. Those are their Twitter handles below. And that seems to be kind of the place right now where the community lives and posts a lot of details or everything like that. If you want to conglomerate these all into a list, there's a couple of Twitter lists down there. The Bug Bounty one, run by B, and another one called Insecurity. The links are down there in the corner, and you can grab those. And they have a collection of other hackers, up to 302 different people that maybe you should follow if you're just getting into this. It's a good feed. So, but keep your Twitter, clean of negativity, right? It is a social network. So, okay, so we're gonna go into the first part of the talk, and I'm going fast because I got a lot of content. Hopefully, we'll get through it all. So the first thing we're going to talk about is mental hurdles in testing, and these are things that can get in the way of you hacking your target or stop you dead in your tracks. So the first one I want to talk about is client reputation. And so you can see here I put a picture of Tesla here, who is going to be used in a lot of the examples today anyway. But the thing is about Tesla, and maybe this will be a little bit personal, is that I know people who work at Tesla, and they are epic security people. And so when I look at Tesla and I'm like, oh, should I do this bug bounty or should I take this test, as a pen tester or something like that? And this could be for any site, not just Tesla. But you could have this idea of the reputation of this company, and the people that work there, and the money that the company makes, and just think, wow, like I'm not really, up to hacking something like that, right? Like I think of my friend who works there. He's twice the hacker I am, super smart, and yeah, and so like the first thing that goes through my mind is, I'm not going to find anything. There's nothing that they haven't already found, that I'll find, and that's actually a fallacy, right? So as you, I don't know if fallacy is the right word, but I'm going to call it a fallacy. As you grow in size and complexity, as Tesla has in their kind of web footprint, the more complexity you have, the more opportunity for bugs that they'll have. And you'll find this is a repeated pattern I'm going to say over all of these hurdles is complexity equals more bugs. And that's always the case. And you will be proven wrong every time that there are simple bugs still on some of these sites. And you'll see some of them in the presentation to prove that not only, do you have an opportunity to hack this, but, other people have hacked it as well. And you can do it. You can get past this first hurdle of kind of reputation of the company. The second hurdle you can run into as an offensive security person, an assessment person, a bug bounty hunter, is if there's been a lot of pre-testing done, and this exists both in bug bounty and not in bug bounty, right? You have GitHub here, who has a really great bug bounty. Not only do they run it through a platform, but they also have their own page where they give out their own badges and rewards, and they give out money for critical rewards. You can see some really great hackers have scored bugs on their bounty. And so you can get into this mindset of, hey, it's already been picked over. There's no way that I'm going to find a bug on GitHub, right? And this is also a fallacy. Again, complexity and size mean that bugs are getting introduced all the time, and there's plenty of stuff still out there. Any website you visit nowadays has bugs associated to it. So don't worry about anybody who's stepped on that path before. Just go and tread your own path. I promise it'll be valuable to you, and if you don't find anything, you'll definitely learn something. And that's kind of the joy of hacking. But there are bugs there. There are bugs in every application. The third one is size. And so you can look at this is Salesforce Cloud, I think. And so you can look at an application like this, and automatically you can see that there's so many sections of the application. There's so many form fields. And then you can look in the back, in the back end, well, not really in the back end, but you can look in your interception proxy when you're proxying a site like this through Burp and see hundreds or thousands of parameters. I've seen medical apps with thousands of parameters. And at this point you start thinking, holy crap, I don't know if I can do this. There's so much to do. It's overwhelming. I don't want to do it. And you're really doing yourself a disservice, right? Because like I said, size equals complexity, complexity equals bugs. And there's been plenty of bugs on Salesforce, a lot. And also, honestly, when you get to applications like this, some of these functions, like at the top, menu bar, opportunities or leads or tasks or files or whatever, they will have different functionality and have custom code applied to them. But a lot of the way that the application is handling inputs is the same across a whole site like this. It's duplicated, it's templatized, etc. And so, it's less daunting than you think if you focus on the right places. So don't let size get you down. The last one is a less common one, but still exists. Is basically people can look at a piece of paid software or a piece of open source software, most commonly open source actually, and they'll look at it and they'll be like, oh, it's open source. Everybody's already looked at this. It's kind of related to one of the earlier ones, but they'll look at this and be like, no, there's no way I'm going to find a bug on an installed application that's open source that everybody has already looked at. And that is absolutely false. It's been proven time and again that sometimes these open source projects have more bugs than closed source software. So this is also another one of the fallacies. So let's say you get through those four, and you decide to start hacking a site, and this is one that I see happens a lot with new hunters, and it's only touching the surface level of the site. So there might be some functionality to the site that is unauthenticated, right? Like the search function or a blog. There might even be some application functionality that doesn't require authentication. And testers will get past the first four hurdles or any one of the first hurdles and get to this point and start touching the application and get discouraged by not finding anything right away. And this is the discussion that a lot of bug hunters have, is like, you got to go in depth, right? And so the first, I guess this is the fifth hurdle, is you got to authenticate. You got to, build, or you got to basically requisition an account. And then all of the juicy stuff is on the other side of, getting an account for this site, right? The My Profile section, any integrations, paid account functions, multiple user levels, customer data, persistent user input that could become cross-site scripting, upload functions, undocumented API calls, and admin tools. This is all past the authentication part of the application. And so this is the last hurdle that you'll need to jump through in order to really get into in-depth testing. So those are the mental hurdles. So now we're going to talk about pre-manual testing and automation. So the three sections here that I have it broken down to are tech profiling, finding CVEs and misconfigurations, and port scanning. So when I look at an application, I actually try to break it down into several sections. And this is how I look at an application as far as how I have to test it. So there are, 6 layers here. The first layer is like open ports and services on this server, right? And in this case, there could be remote authentication services like SSH or FTP or RDP or something like that. And normally I would consider these in scope for most tests, right? And so uh, you want to make sure that there's no default creds on those services. And you also have the opportunity for those services to have exploits themselves, although it's less likely nowadays that you'll find a service level exploit at that level. But it could exist at some point. Then you have your web hosting software, right? Your Apaches, your Nginx's, your hosting software, your web hosting software. And so this can have a whole set of places that you look for. You can have default creds, in things like Tomcat or whatever. It can have web server misconfigurations where configuration files are being leaked, and it can have exploits against the web hosting software or web server software, but that's also less likely. Not a lot of times are you seeing web server software exploits at that level. But misconfigurations and default creds, absolutely a thing at that layer. Then you have your application framework, which also has the same stuff as above, right? You have an application framework that possibly has a login to administer something, or it has a configuration file that you might have misconfigured wrong or left world readable, and it can also have bugs associated to the application framework. And then you have your custom code. And your custom code is what your target has, built more of their application or most of their application on usually, unless they've paid for COTS software, which is I call custom off-the-shelf software, basically paid software. Um, and then that is where a majority of the bugs live because it's custom code. And that is where your SQL injections and your IDORs and all that kind of stuff, like custom application vulnerabilities, will lie there. Then you have your baked-in libraries or dependencies, usually JavaScript. They can have associated vulnerabilities as well, most likely web vulnerabilities, and we'll talk about that later. And then integrated deeply into the flow of your application, you could have integrations where your site is talking to other sites, and there's opportunities to both attack your site or other sites through the integrations that your application does. So this is how I look at the testing layers for any given application, and how I break them down in my mind. And I have to test each one of them, and we'll talk about techniques and tools and tips and tricks to go after, most of these places in this talk. So the first thing I need to do when I attempt to hack a site is I need to know what technology it's running. And so you can use two browser extensions I like for this are WhatRuns and Wappalyzer. You can see on the left-hand side, I'm looking at Tesla, and it tells me right away that Drupal is their CMS. They're using caching of Varnish. They're on a CDN of Akamai, et cetera, et cetera. And their programming language is PHP. And they're getting all this information by reading the source of the HTML in several sections, looking for README files that might have been left over, et cetera, et cetera. Wappalyzer on the right-hand side is looking at Twitch. Gives a little bit less information, but I can see it's Nginx, also Varnish. It's got some tag managers and Webpack and etc. So these will give you right away at least a decent knowledge of what technology you're up against when you're going up against a single site. So I like to give options for both interactive tools like those browser extensions as well as command line tools, because you might want to take everything in this talk and somehow automate it into a chain to do your testing. And so this is a command line alternative to those. It's called Web Analyze, and you can give it a host, and it will give you back some or if not all of the information that the other tools give you. It'll tell you the JavaScript libraries, the web server, and the caching information that you want to know, and sometimes even more. So if you want to do it on the command line, Web Analyze is what I recommend. All right, so you've done your technology profiling. Now we want to look for any CVEs and misconfigurations. And this is a contentious area of the talk, but that's okay. We're going to talk about it a little bit. So normally if you're like a red teamer or an offensive security person or assessment person, you need to provide some coverage that there's no like existing CVEs, which are known vulnerabilities in software that are published to MITRE, that exist, right? And so normally if you're an enterprise level, like If you're an enterprise like red teamer or offensive security person, you're doing a pen test, or even if you're doing consulting pen tests, you'll use like a Nessus or something like that, or some type of scanner just to complete the coverage part of your testing. And and so there are some free alternatives for you to do this, and even in bug hunting you can use these tools as well, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But having completed recon, you want to look for these CVEs. You also want to look for things like login pages and maybe default creds related to non-custom code. And so these are things that are associated to the frameworks and the CMSs and the libraries that exist on your target. So here you can see the first one we're going to talk about is Nuclei, which is made by Project Discovery. It has 1,000 plus CVE checks, 100 plus informational detections that give information about different technologies, over 500 admin panel checkers, and a total of over 3,000 total templates that give you security information about a site. So this is the same kind of stuff that like Nessus does, and it's really powerful. And so there's a lot of checks, and so Nuclei is one of the perennial tools in this area right now. Now there are other tools to find these CVEs and misconfigurations that are published as in the wild, and to find these panels. And so another one I really like is Jails by Jesse JJJ. And these are old numbers. I put these together when I started doing this talk like a year ago. So these are probably outdated. There's probably way more checks at this point in Jails than this. But it's got a ton, these tools have a ton of other extensibility as well. So not just checking for control panels, but some of these even actually do injection testers where they'll do a little bit of spidering and they'll actually do some custom injection and stuff like that. And so really with the combination of these, if you're a red teamer or offensive security person that isn't a bounty hunter, you can get this coverage almost for free now. Same thing as Nessus with the combination of these tools or using one of them. You have Intrigue Core here, you have Sniper, you have Go Fingerprint, and Retire.js looks for outdated dependencies for JavaScript libraries and things like that. And so you can do all this scanning on the cheap. The only problem is that Nessus, you can do internal level scanning really easily. You can still use these tools to scan web servers internally, but also Nessus does things like patch levels at the OS level, so you don't get that with these type of things. They're just checking for usually web bugs that are CVE published. And so I like Jails here, I like Nuclei, and these other tools too. I've all used them in all different forms, and they're pretty awesome for a variety of different things. Now, this is a tweet by Corbin, who's a friend of mine on the left here. And so he's talking about Nuclei in the vein of that it's a competitive disadvantage. And he's saying, contrary to what you've been told, you're guaranteed duplicates and heartbreak in the bounty context. And you know what? He's right, but in a certain context. So if you're testing like Tesla.com, a known target, then yeah, probably everybody has hit that with Nuclei. There's probably little point to scanning it, and you'll probably just get duplicates, and it's not really worth it, right? I have found success using Nuclei even in a bounty context. If I felt like I had done really good recon and I was testing a site that not many other testers had gotten to yet. And that's kind of a gut feeling. Sometimes you find like a domain that you don't think that in a wide scope program that nobody has touched yet. I've done that several times where I find this random domain in my proxy traffic and I'm like, oh, this is my client's. I know it is because it has their trademark or something else. It has data of theirs on it, or it has their logo, but it's not the domain that everybody else I think is looking at right now. And so I have found success using Nuclei on fresh targets, as well as if you're just an offensive security tester. The tool is great, and providing coverage and using it is probably part of a workflow you should have at some point. Also, Nuclei is great because it makes building scanner checks really, really easy. So the templates for Nuclei are very easy to make. And so if you have a new bug that comes out tomorrow and there's not a CVE yet, and there's not really a great knowledge of how the bug is executed, but you have that knowledge, you can quickly script up a Nuclei template and start scanning with it on your infrastructure or bounties or anything like that. So there are pros and cons to using these CVE finding tools, and but I'm really a big fan of Nuclei, and I've found success with it in certain places, and so happy to promote it. All right, so on top of finding CVEs at the layer of like the web server or the layer of the server itself, you also want to do some port scanning. Usually you tie your port scanning into like a larger recon process, but today we're just talking about hacking one site, right? And so if you're just going after one site and you just want to do a port scan, Nabu by Project Discovery as well is the fastest and most extensible port scanner that's out right now, I think. Basically, you can give it a host or a domain, it will resolve it and it will do a port scan for you. And it has a ton of extensibility. You can pipe it then into Nmap for service scanning. It's got a whole bunch of output options. It can scan CIDRs, anything, scan anything basically, and it's optimized and it's, pretty good. So if you're just going to do like a one-shot port scan, Nabu is the way to go. All right, so we've talked about this pre-stuff that we need to do before getting into the next phase, which is content discovery. And in content discovery, there's several sections. So it is one of the most important parts of your web hacking kind of journey, or your session in hacking, this single site that we're fictitiously talking about. It's and there's about 7 different things that I like to talk about when talking about content discovery that are tips or tricks or things that you need to know. So we're going to dive right into them. So first off, we're going to talk about content discovery tools. And you can see that I have a preference right now with the fire icons in the lower left corner, and that's okay. But I'm going to talk about a little bit of these each. So GoBuster or DirSearch was the first one that exists. It's written in Python, and it was the one we used about 5 years ago. Then WFuzz came along, then GoBuster, then FFuff. Somewhere right before FFuff, I think Turbo Intruder came out, and then FarrowBuster is relatively new in the scene. So GoBuster, a lot of extensibility, a lot of filters. WFuzz is preferred by people who really want to control the filters and the response codes, looking for the response codes that come back from these brute forcing tools. DirSearch written in Python, so very extensible in Python, also has a lot of filtering capabilities. FFuff is really fast, and it was the bug bounty content discovery tool of choice for a long time. Turbo Intruder is probably the fastest out of all of them because it incorporates HTTP pipelining, being able to send a whole bunch of requests, via one HTTP connection. And so Turbo Intruder is really fast, but is hampered a little bit by being part of Burp and not on the command line. And also, feeding lists into Turbo Intruder is not as intuitive as some of these other tools. I have put the fire emojis next to FarrowBuster right now because it is my current tool of choice, probably number 1, because it has a couple features that I've been looking for in a content discovery tool for a long time. So what FarrowBuster has is the ability to pause a content discovery scan and edit it while it's paused. And so what you'll have happen a lot of times is you'll start your content discovery with a giant list, a generic list, something like that, and then basically you'll hit a 200, but is actually a not found page. So it's a not found page, but it's a custom 200 response. So the tool just says, yeah, this is here, this is here, this is here, this is here for every line in your list that you're doing content discovery for. And so if I have that up on a screen and I'm doing content discovery in a project, I can pause it and then add a filter really quick using FarrowBuster and then resume FarrowBuster. It also has an auto resume if you accidentally close the scan, you can resume any given scan. And so that's a feature I've been looking for a long time in a content discovery tool, as well as it has all the extensibility that these other ones do, control of filtering of outputs, as well as what you want to send input with cookies, headers, etc., etc. And then also it has a feature to auto tune, which basically will find those edge cases where you're getting 200s, and it will auto tune them out of the results. So it's fast, and it also is recursive. Most of these are recursive tools, except for Turbo Intruder. I think they have options for recursion, and we'll talk about recursion in a second. Okay, so content discovery tools are nothing without the lists that drive them. And, basically what we're doing here is we are sending requests trying to find paths and files that exist on the web server. And so we need some really good lists. Now, you'll see here that I have my mind map of how I break up content discovery lists and which ones I would use in certain cases. So you'll see that in the bottom left-hand corner, I have a key that says anything that has that blue triangle next to it is actually from Asset Note's word list project. And so Asset Note did a whole bunch of work with BigQuery and went out and spidered the internet using BigQuery to find or to build content discovery lists for certain technologies or just generic ones that we could use. It's an excellent project. I suggest you check it out, wordlists.assetnote.com. And here's how I break those down. So if I'm going after an IIS or Microsoft technology, I am going to use the asset note list that starts with HTTP archive, ASPX, ASP, CFMs, SVC, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to use that list. And the reason there's no extension on these or a dot, dot, dot is because they're updated periodically. And so you're going to want to choose the list that has the most recent date. That's why the dot, dot, dot is there, is because the date will change all the time. And then I also want to use IIS short name scanner by Sarush. He basically made that tool, and it will brute force short names up to a certain number of characters to help you find paths as well in Microsoft technologies. If I'm going after PHP, there's two that I use there, both part of Asset Notes list there. If I'm going after a general API, there's their Swagger word list and their HTTP archive API routes, and so that'll help you discover routes for APIs. As well as there's an API endpoint as part of a project called SecList, which me and my friend Daniel Miesler run, and that has some API endpoint paths in it as well. So I'll use those three for general API fuzzing or for content discovery. Java, there's a Java file based in wordlist.assetnote.com, and then there's 4 or 5 generic ones that I will use in addition to the technology specific one. And so for the one that's maintained by AssetNote, I think is really good, is the HP Archive Directories 1 million. Remember, requests are free. So, like I'm not really worried about sending 1 million requests. I don't know. Some people might need to be stealth, but I got to have that coverage. There's also the Raft list and the Robot Disallowed lists, which are very similar. So Raft came out many, many years ago and was basically a word list built out of the contents of all of the robots.txt files on the internet. And if you know anything about spidering and how spiders work for search engines, robots.txt file tells the spiders where not to index. And so it's kind of an indication of where sites don't want you to go. And so the Raft project went and collected all of the robots.txt files across the Alexa something or something, and basically turned them into a word list for us to find the things that people didn't want found. That was old, very old. I think it's about 12 years now, maybe 10 years. I don't know. But it's still a very, very good list. A lot of people use it. Robots Disallowed did the exact same thing, but refreshed it later on. So I would actually prefer Robots Disallowed over Raft at this point. And there's granular sets of lists, just like Raft. So you have a large one, a medium one, a small one, etc. And that's actually built by Daniel Miesler as well. And then you have some newer stuff. So the One List for All is actually made. One List for All is a generic content discovery list made by 62des, who also makes Recon for the Win, which I'm a big fan of. And that list is about a year old, I think, and basically takes a couple of other lists, removes a lot of cruft in them, like junk numbers and stuff like that, and is a pretty good content discovery generic list, as well as I have one called Content Discovery All, which I have used to great success in my hunting. It does still have a lot of the cruft that has been removed in one list for all, but still I've had really good success with it. So every once in a while I choose to use it on a whim. Okay, so on top of grouping those technologies together, you'll start to uncover, using some of the tools that that we talked about before, and understand the technologies that are on your site. So you might understand, okay, you're against Apache or Nginx or Rails or Tomcat or whatever. And in the section of Asset Notes word list project, there's a technology to host mapping section, and you can look up your specific technology there and see um, if it's represented, and then you would use that list for the specific technology as well. So AEM or Laravel or whatever. So yeah, so those are how I map word lists and the ones I use. Asset Node is doing the best research in this area right now, and yeah, I would use a lot of their stuff. Okay, so when you're doing research on your technology or you look at any of these lists, one thing that you want to take special attention to is configuration files for your technology that you're against, specifically the web server or the application framework. And so a lot of times you'll see the example here, there is at some point in an application, sometimes exposed to the internet or in the paths that are exposed to the internet, a configuration file or something like that that has your database URL and port and username and password, and maybe your AWS keys in it, or possibly some other API keys that are really sensitive. And so, while a default install usually does not have these, disclosed, sometimes server misconfigurations can happen. Access can be granted, and you can accidentally leave something like your app settings.json file out there for the world to read. I talked with this one Corbin Leo, who's referenced in this presentation a couple times. He actually found this same thing in one of his hacker stories really recently. He found an app settings.json file out on the internet, an easy finding. So you want to look for the configuration files for your web server and for your application framework. And then you also want to you want to do some research as to where the admin login is for if there's like a CMS or a CRM that you're up against, or maybe even the application framework has a login. You want to understand where that is and where the endpoints are associated to it, so that where to look for access bugs in that vein too, because you want to make sure to try to get there if you can. All right, in content discovery, you also can sometimes go against something that is open source. So if you're going against, an application that's built off an open source technology, Dan has built this project called Source to URL. And basically, it will, if you download the open source project yourself and install it on your Linux system or your Windows system or whatever, you can place this bash file in the root, and it will build a complete map of all files and paths past the web group. And then it will also forward those URLs if you give it a prefix of your target, and it will build with the prefix and the sitemap that you've built using the tool. It'll request it through a proxy so it can go straight through Burp or Zap or something like that. And so then you'll get a full mapping of everything that could be possible in a default install of that framework or open source software. So this is a really cool tool to use if you're up against something like that. All right, so what if the application you're up against, or if the customer you're up against has, installed something like this CRM, like a paid piece of software, right? And so, you don't have a, list in Asset Note that tells you basically what to do for content discovery here. And it's a little known, site or whatever. Well, what you want to do is you want to try to get a demo, basically. And you can see here for this example, Suite CRM is a CRM software that any of our targets could potentially decide to use and install on one of their servers. And so if you go to the manufacturer, usually referenced in the source of the page when you land on it, eventually you'll figure out that it is a piece of paid software. You can go to their site. And some sites will, like Suite CRM, have a demo for you to play around with. And so here you can see they have a Suite CRM 8 demo with a username and password that's given to you. You can just play around with it. This is where you can make a content discovery list for yourself of this custom paid software. And you want to pay special attention to the admin functionality of the site, as well as any private data sections of the site, those endpoints. You're going to want to pay special attention to marking those down. So you can then go to your target who has installed this software and try to get to them using content discovery, or later on when you need to get to private data, where the endpoint is. Let's say they don't offer a sweet demo like this where you can just use it on your own leisure. Well, you can call and usually get a demo with a lot of these companies. You just call them up, say you're interested in purchasing the software, and you have a budget, and you're fancy, and you have a suit, and they will pitch you, and you usually have to spend about an hour with them, and they will pitch you on the site and show you how it works, and then you can either take notes on the application, that demo call, and if that's all they give you, that sucks, but a lot of times they'll give you a demo of the site at the end of like a sales pitch call. So, and that's how you build a content discovery list for, paid software or commonly off the shelf software. All right, what about custom content discovery lists? What about building something that is contextually relevant to your site? So here I have Capital One, which is a HackerOne program, and basically I've spidered a whole bunch of stuff and got some stuff in my burp site tree, and I'm really digging right now this tool called Scavenger. So what Scavenger do? Well, it will basically you select a couple of domains in your site tree, and you can basically go up to the Scavenger function after you install the extension in burp, and you can say, create me a custom word list from your burp history. And then it will spit out this file, which has a collection of parameters, endpoints, all kinds of stuff, and also contextual words that it sees repeated. And it will build you a custom contextual word list. There is some junk in it. Every once in a while you'll get like some of this stuff, like on the right hand side, you'll see like Google Analytics, Google AdWords, or Facebook audiences, right? Those are never going to be passing and run into, but for the rest of it, it is pretty good for building a custom word list. And so Tom Nonon did a talk about doing this, in one of the past NahamCons, and this is really the easiest way I found for me to build these contextual word lists is with this tool called Scavenger by Dexterous. All right, so you want to build a content discovery list, but you want to do it from historical data. So this is one of the methods that you can do as well. So GAO is kind of the best tool in this area. What GAO does is it goes back to Alien Vault's Open Thread Exchange and the Wayback Machine for any domain, and will pull all the URLs and endpoints out of there. And then you can feed it to a tool like WordListGen by Amin Mali, and basically create a word list of paths that have existed in the past, and you can then brute force using that against your current site in its state as it is now. What happens here with GAO a little bit is that GAO can get pretty spammy with a lot of with an enterprise level site that has very similar URLs and similar functionality. It can get a little spammy. So shout out to Michael here, who built a tool that's not in the screenshot because I couldn't fit it all on one page, called Trash Compactor. What Trash Compactor will do is look at the similarity of certain things on pages and remove them if they have a lot of similarities. So you can basically unspamify a little bit of that GAO output and sweeten it up a little bit or make the word list more concise when you pass it to WordListGen, or you just want those GAO URLs for some other reason. So this is how you create a historical-based content discovery list. All right, so a tip on content discovery that I think a lot of people, a lot of seasoned hunters know, but a lot of new hunters or new red teamers or new offensive security people don't know, is that basically you need to recursively brute force your target. So at the bottom here, I have an example of, some app/admin will give you a 401 response, right, which is not authorized. And everything that you get 401 on, basically you should mark as an area for recursion, basically. So you can see that we got a 401 for /admin. And then we told our tool to keep on brute forcing in this fictitious scenario. And it also got a 401 for admin/dashboard. And at some point, new bug bounty hunters will stop there and be like, okay, I have my list of 200s for all this other stuff. And, I kind of did recursion, or maybe I went 2 levels deep or something like that. But really, it behooves you to fully recursively brute force, because there are many times, and I have made a lot of money off of recursive content discovery. At some point, there's going to be some misconfiguration that allows you to access, something. And you can see the final example is dashboard members gives a 200, and you bypassed authentication, and you're on the inside of the app. And this is taken verbatim from a finding I've had in Bug Bounty. I had a CRM that was a pretty well known one, and somehow the admins or the developers had misconfigured a couple of the endpoints. And so I didn't have any authentication creds. And eventually I recursively brute forced and found a page that I could access that gave access to something like, oh boy, I want to say like 1 million personal records and access to SMS, a whole bunch of any of those users. So I could have sent out like a SMS to them, and it was a huge finding, huge payout. So recursive content discovery is absolutely necessary for hunters and offensive security people. Cool. Another tip for content discovery is parse the mobile app. So often the scope for a bug bounty or a red team test or something like that is based off of a domain. And a lot of time the mobile APIs will actually be based off the same domain, but use the existing API or even a different API for the mobile functions. And so this is all scope that you can test because it's on your domain, right? Except for that you need to get these special endpoints, these ones that are only available to the mobile app, out of the mobile app. And so you can do this with a couple tools, but I like this one called APK leaks. You can basically find the Android app, in this case Uber Eats. You can find it off one of those secondary app stores where you can download the APK on your computer, upload it to your VPS, run APK leaks on it, and it will not only pull out all the paths that exist for the web endpoints inside of the mobile app, because it unzips the APK and then it does, like strings analysis on it. But it'll also look for hard-coded API keys and some other metadata that's useful in your testing as well. So you can see here that, UberEats.com, I ran this on Uber Eats, and I'm seeing pretty cool API points about redemption of gifts and stuff like that. And you can also see that there's versions of different parts of the API, which is interesting because I want to basically test anything that's an older version. I think that's an interesting place to look, etc. And so finding endpoints from mobile file or mobile applications, it's really simple. You just download the APK, you run this on it, and you get a whole bunch of paths that you can dump in Burp or your browser. So a cool tip to check out. So another tip is like changes to your site. And this is probably more for the bug hunters than the rest of the offensive security folk, but sometimes being the first to a new function means that you find the vulnerability. And so you have to figure out creative ways to stay knowledgeable about your target if you're going to hack on them for a long time. And so there are several ways to do this. Some of the ways that I like are you got to sign up for your target's newsletter. Many companies and products have newsletters, and the first place that they'll go to talk about new development they're doing or new features that are launching with the site is their newsletter. Another thing is a lot of these places have affiliate programs, and affiliate programs sometimes give you access to new features before anybody else, because you're kind of a trusted insider for one of these places, and so for one of these applications. And so being an affiliate, working to get that affiliate status or talking to them about access for that, it can be a really good thing. The next one is conference talks. So basically your target, probably goes out to tech conferences in their vertical or any type of conference in their vertical, and they might talk about application functionality that's on the horizon or their roadmap or something like that. And so being ready to test that code when it comes out before anybody else can give you that little edge in speed that you want to find vulnerabilities before other people. Verbatim, they might drop a feature at one of these conferences. So if you're watching it live, you could be the first one to test that functionality that nobody else knows about. So Googling conference talks that the company's giving and looking at public roadmaps. The last one is via tech, actually monitoring the domain for code changes. And this one I haven't used yet, but was given to me by my friend Patrick, and he said that it looks cool, and so I'm going to try it out soon. But it's called changedetection.io, and you can enter in domains and pages and monitor for changes and actually get alerts for changes that happen to the code base. And so this could be useful to just like send you like a Slack message or a Discord DM or something like that when something has changed, and you can go check it out. So live change detection as well. So these are some tips on how to get to features first. All right, now to the brunt of the application, or the brunt of the presentation, which is application analysis. So we have 5 sections here, and I'm gonna blow through them pretty fast because running out of time. All right, so questions I ask myself when I'm testing applications, right? These are, there was 7, but I think I trimmed down to 5. Anyway, how does the app pass data? And this is really important that you understand this, especially as a new tester. And it seems like such a simple thing, but it's really important. Are they using a resource parameter and value structure that was, like very common and prominent in the last, 10 years or something like that? Or are they using a REST method that's more similar to, method, route, resource, sub-resource? And that's how they're, passing data through the application is through different methods. It's important to understand this because it's a cornerstone of how you'll do a lot of your fuzzing, your injection testing later on in the application. And I've seen people, uh, you know, basically not understand how their application is sending data, not inspect it super well, but then try to scan for bugs using automated scanners or using like burp scanner or something, or even fuzzing manually, but fuzzing manually in the wrong place, and fail because they just don't understand how their application is passing data. So this is one of the first questions I ask when I'm on a site. How is my application passing data? I want to understand it. And then that will set me up for success for the rest of my test. The second question I ask when I get on a site is, where does the app talk about users, and how does it talk about users? And so understanding users, both yourself and other users, and how they're referenced is important because it leads into several bugs that are in the realms of access, authentication, logic, information disclosure, etc. And so what you're looking for here is, how do they reference a user? Is it a UID? Is it an email? Is it a username, or is it a UUID? How do they reference you or any other user in their APIs, or their requests? And then where are they referencing you? What API calls are you being referenced in? Is that UUID being used in? And if it's an API call and it has a referenced UUID for yourself and you're just using the application regularly, what if you create a second account and put another UUID in there? Can you get somebody else's information back? Are they, cross-referencing the API call with the session to make sure, it's you, etc.? There's a lot of bugs are based around access authentication and information disclosure that really center around understanding how the application references you as a user and where it does this. So this is the second question I ask when I'm starting to look at an application. All right, so the third question is, does the site have multi-tenancy or user levels? So this will dictate on classes of bugs that we check for authorization and access. Again, a lot of these last 3 slides are specifically about or referencing authorization access bugs, and that's because, like, as time goes on, the frameworks and the technologies and the protection technologies tend to push us away from traditional injection bugs and stuff like that. Like, cross-site scripting protections are released in every new framework, and although there's bypasses, there's less and less of them as time goes on. They'll always be around, but they're not going to be as prevalent. But access and authentication, access, authentication, and authorization bugs, they are the gift that keeps on giving when it comes to security testing. Because no matter what framework you make, it's just really hard for you to build a comprehensive system of access and authorization. And even then, when you do, people have to configure it right when they make custom code to make sure that it's rigged up correctly. And so these are, IDORs and authorization bugs and, API level bugs that give information disclosure They're the kind of things that you see a lot these days. Anyway, so how does your site work? Does it have multiple users or multiple tenants? Like let's say for instance BugCrowd, right? BugCrowd has a SaaS application that hosts bounties for customers, right? If you're on the customer side, and when you log in to your tenant, you have your bounties and you can control them. But on that system, there are other customers on that system, right? And so it's a multi-tenant style site. So when you start testing, you want to know this because you want to start asking yourself, can I access other tenants' data somehow, either through APIs or different types of bugs? Or if I get, an injection bug, can I go after someone else's data? Because that's really valuable to do. Um, so is it designed for, multiple customers or is it multi-tenant? And then if the application isn't, or even if it is, are there different levels of user? Because these will dictate how you test for authorization bugs. So, is there an admin user or like an account user, an account viewer, or even some unauthenticated functionality to the app? And can the unauthenticated view data that a viewer should only be able to view? And can a viewer view any data that only the user or the admin is supposed to be able to view? And you can go all the way up or down this chain to understand, are they able to access anything they're not supposed to at their user level? And so understanding your application and if it has user levels is important. Even at your framework level, sometimes there's user levels there too, like the admin of a CMS or a CRM or something like that. And so these are questions you want to ask yourself because they'll also set you up for success later on when you're testing and want to do authorization checks. All right, so does the site have a unique threat model? So this is one which is kind of hard to explain, but I'll do my best here, right? So if an application houses more than your standard PII data, like email address, credit card, blah blah blah, and if you're a security tester, it can be easy to forget about some non-standard some non-standard data that still might be sensitive. And so, like as a tester, even me sometimes, I can get so far down the role of like, oh, I need to be testing the site for these classes of vulnerabilities and for PII, et cetera, that I miss out on the unique threat model that maybe a site has. And here we're looking at Twitch, my Twitch. And, one of the things that is holy grail for Twitch is protecting the stream key so nobody can hijack your stream. Also protecting your real name and username because on Twitch, if you're like a Twitch celebrity, you don't want to get doxxed and you don't want everybody to swat your house and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So even though this is regular user data, it's not exactly PII or the most critical PII. This API key is something to be sought after in your testing, and it's important to know, does your site have a unique threat model? This is the same with like medical sites. If you're testing a site that is a medical company or something like that, like a lot of data in there can be really it can be really valuable as an attacker and can matter to the customer that it's disclosed, but it's not necessarily your traditional PII. So, the question you ask yourself when you get on a site is, does this site have a unique threat model that I care about? All right, another question is, has there been past security research or vulnerabilities? And here you can see, basically, I did a ton of Googling on Tesla, right? Tesla's my fictitious program I'm going against here. I can see there was some DOM XSS against forums.tesla.com. I can see that my friend Sam Curry put a blind cross-site scripting payload as the name of his car, I believe, and then broke down, and the blind XSS payload fired in the back end of the customer service people for Tesla, which is hilarious. You can also see that BugCrowd has a whole bunch of disclosures for Tesla, which reference cross-site scripting and the exact bug URL where it took place. This is very interesting to me because it's recent and it's on the main domain that I'm testing. So I definitely want to read about this and understand what happened there, not only to give me some clues as to what happened, but also the area of the application it took place in. And then also you could even test the same vulnerability for regressions later on. So doing research on, has the application had vulns before, has it been security tested before, et cetera, will always pay you dividends later on in your test. It's great to have this information, understand how the platform has attacked. It's also a good confidence booster, right? The Tesla had an XSS, which is a pretty generic web bug, on their main domain. We talked about some of the hurdles in the beginning of the presentation. Well, this is proof that everybody has bugs. Everybody has bugs, and people can find them. So, all right, the next question is, how does it handle these three things? And this is just me personally. These are questions that I built. This isn't like any methodology that anybody else built. But when I go against an application, a custom application, or even a framework, I want to know three things. How does it handle XSS? And not really specifically XSS, but how does it handle output encoding of special characters? And so you can see here on the left, I'm just Googling, right? A ton of application hacking is Googling and reading and doing research on your application and your target. And so you can see here I'm looking at like larval XSS protection. There's a ton of basically guides on what the sanitization does in larva, as well as people who are saying that they've bypassed the sanitization. And I want to read about this. I want to know. And maybe it's based on a version number, and I can do an attack based on the version that's installed, or something like that. And so it really behooves you to do research on the framework to understand what it's doing for these three areas. And so the areas are output encoding, or XSS. That's one I look at. The next one is I want to do research on how the application protects itself from cross-site request forgery. Is it a header, a post body, parameter, something? I want to know how they're protecting against cross-site request forgery in mass. And then that information will be useful to me when I want to look at the rest of the application that I think is custom written, and maybe that was not rigged up correctly. And then code injection, things like SQL injection, template injection, NoSQL injection, any type of code injection that exists. I want to understand what issues they've had in the past, what their framework protects against in input sanitization, et cetera, et cetera. And so these are things that I'll do some Googling for, usually 30, 45 minutes in a really in-depth test. All right, so we're going to move on to spidering. So I kind of already assume that most of you know how to use an interception proxy, right? So we're not going to spend very long on this. There's two interception proxies that are kind of industry best, and that's Burp Suite and Zap. I have been moving more recently towards Zap. But at some point, you're going to want to spider using technology, right? No amount of you walking the app or even doing content discovery from the tools that we talked about in the content discovery section will get you all of the code paths and all of the endpoints. At some point, you're going to need to actually spider the app with a piece of technology that'll execute maybe some stuff that you've missed. So in Zap, pretty simple. You select your domain, you right-click, you choose Attack and Spider, and off it goes. In Burp, it's a little bit more convoluted, but you right-click on your domain in the sitemap, you choose Scan, you choose Crawl Only, and then just some small tips is you can go into your scan configuration. Because Burp recently, and this is just my thing, maybe it's not your thing, but the crawling can sometimes take forever, in the Burp crawler, and sometimes it can time out, and it's not really the best. So I set my crawl strategy to fastest to try to make sure that I get some coverage, but it doesn't take days. And then the other thing is you want to set it to never stop due to application errors, because what will happen is after a few errors, the crawler will stop and it'll just sit paused, and then you'll forget about it, and then you'll press play once you remember, and then you'll forget about it again after it hits a couple errors, and then you'll never finish your crawl. So choose never stop crawl due to application errors in your scan configuration. And then at the bottom on the left hand side, choose your resource pool and give your resource pool more maximum concurrent requests. So I chose 75 here, and that's how you spider in Burp Suite. Okay, let's say you don't want to use Burp Suite to do your spidering. You want to do it on the command line because you're going to rig all this up into some automation to start you off quick or something like that. I don't know, what you want to do. There are two spiders which are best in class: Hack Crawler and Go Spider. They both do similar things. They also do cool things like not only spider the site via command line spider, but they'll parse the robots.txt and request everything in there, and they'll parse JavaScript files using the same regexes that are in Link Finder, which we're going to talk about when we get to the JavaScript section of the talk, which is now. So, JavaScript. Okay, so basically, this is the idea that many bug hunters find endpoints that are buried in JavaScript files, and they find endpoints that are sensitive or not meant for like even views. Sometimes there's even hard coded keys in JavaScript. It's crazy. And so, the OG tool was Link Fighter by Gerben Javato, which basically pulled out relative paths from JavaScript files, full links, and references as well. And so it had kind of 3 or 4 methods to pull out links from JavaScript files, .js files. And so this was really good. A lot of people use this to this day. Link Finder is still great. The regexes are built into a lot of other tools. Like I said, those spiders in the last site. At least I know GoSpider does those regexes to pull things out of JavaScript files. One of the things that I care about though, and then I asked the community about a couple weeks ago was, what about inline JavaScript, right? What about things that are not in a JS file? Like, are we still parsing those for paths and stuff like that? And the answer was there's not a lot of tools to do that. And then one follower said, "Hey, I built this thing," and yeah, it's really awesome. So this is a tool, a command line tool called XN Link Finder by XNL Hacker, and basically you give it your domain and some other arguments, and it will do what I just talked about. It will spider and parse JavaScript files. It'll also parse inline JavaScript and then re-request things. And so it is the first one that I know to do that inline scanning, as well as it has some other features that I really like. At the top, you'll see I added a -sp for it's basically adding a prefix. So a lot of times you'll get the output of these tools and it'll only give you the /inventory new M3. What this does is it prepends a fully fledged beginning part of the URL for you to copy. So I don't have to do that after the fact and try to request it. So it gives you the fully formed link basically, which is awesome. So I love this tool. I think it's pretty sick. So yeah. What about in Burp, right? So XNL Hacker also created a sick Burp extension to do this and other things. So the extension is called Gap, and it parses both endpoints and parameters out of your Burp history in a very intuitive way. You basically right-click on your sitemap, you say send a gap, and then you choose your gap is set up either to create a parameter list or a link list, and then you have your link list, and it's easily copyable. You have the option to show the origin of where the link was parsed out of. You can filter by scope. You can search. It is amazing. It is super cool, and I love this tool called Gap. So I suggest people. There were some other plugins that did link finder type stuff in Burp, and it wasn't as intuitive as this is and easy to use as this is. So this is my current favorite for this in Burp. All right, so some other just like discussion around JavaScript parsing, right? So there's still a couple of stuff. There's still a couple of things about JavaScript parsing that can be tricky, right? When your JavaScript is minified or obfuscated in some way, there's still data in there to be had and endpoints to be seen, but you're going to have to do it manually. So you can feed minified JavaScript to Beautifier, or you can try to obfuscate it using different techniques and tools, but really it ends up being a manual endeavor. There is some work being done in this space by Matsu, who was basically introduced to me on Twitter by the author of FFUF, and Matsu is a lot of this is above my head, so that's okay, but is using TypeScript language services to try to work on files that maybe have been minified or obfuscated. And so he posted some code a couple weeks ago when I was having this discussion about looking at JavaScript and the tools around it. And stay tuned for his Twitter at Matsu _ for maybe something in the future. All right. So the last part of the JavaScript section is that there are such things as JavaScript dependencies. The OG tool for this, or the pioneer here was retire.js, which um, basically looked for version levels of your libraries, and if they were below a certain version level, they knew that they were vulnerable to certain web bugs. And so a lot of this has been ported already into Burp Suite by default. So you can see here that Burp now can give you these alerts that say vulnerable JavaScript dependency. Your Bootstrap is subject to these 4 XSS payloads because it's lower than version 3.2 or something like that. So this has already been baked into Burp, but it's important to look at the components that are making up your application, especially your JavaScript dependencies and libraries. It's still really important, and you can find bugs in there in old versions and exploit them. So, all right, so now I want to talk about heat mapping. So this is the idea of it's one of my own terms. It didn't come out of any book or anything like that. This is kind of how I think about applications. And so heat mapping is my term for places inside an application where bad things can normally happen, or things I want to look at that may indicate interesting places to explore. And you can call it hacker intuition or whatever, but this is kind of what I ask myself when I'm looking, and this is my mind map, and it's a work in progress for heat mapping an application. So the first thing I want to do is look at upload functions. I really care about upload functions in several different ways. The first is integrations, right? Let's say that your site doesn't have a verbatim self-upload function, but you can tie it to Facebook, right? And so Facebook will give this site your profile picture on Facebook or LinkedIn or something like that, and it will magically show up in the site that you're testing. Well, what if you put, payloads in that image that you give to LinkedIn or Facebook, and then you set this integration up from a third party, and you're able to exploit a bug in your application, like XSS or something like that. So, integrations with upload functions are something I want to look at. Also, self-uploads. So if there's an upload function verbatim in your site, what type of upload function is it? Is it like a document that you're able to upload? Well, those are XML. Most of them are XML based, right? And so there's opportunity there to embed SSRF attacks in the XML schema, or XSS attacks in the XML schema. And so if you're able to upload documents, you want to make sure you're testing for those. If you're able to upload an image, right, you can do things like basically fiddle with the image, either the name of the image, the binary header, or the metadata, and you can try to attack the uploader for XSS. Or you can do some old school magic by trying to upload, a shell in any of these situations, right? Like a PHP shell or an ASP shell or something like that. If they're not correctly checking content type or the binary data or any other various methods of doing a shell upload attack. And then if it's not if you're doing an upload, where is the data stored? Is it on the server itself? Is that stored there, or is it on some kind of cloud storage? Does that cloud storage have the proper permissions set up on it? And do I need to test those permissions to make sure I can't access somebody else's content on that cloud service? So these are things I ask myself about upload functions. They're particularly important to me. Content types are another thing on my heat map. Anything that returns a content type about JSON and XML, it's most likely a web service. These days, web services are basically where a lot of bugs are, because it's easy to have access, authorization, and data leaks in an API if you don't do it correctly. And so I care immediately about XML and content type JSON coming back to understand where the API is, and I can get started on it. And then multi-part forms. This one's hard to explain, but I've just never found a site that used a multi-part form before that I didn't find a file upload vulnerability on for some reason. So it's just in my heat map. Like anytime I see a multi-part form, I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm going to test that. I don't know if it's an indication of multi-part forms were used in a time in the web that, things were really vulnerable. I'm not sure. So now APIs. I care a lot about APIs in my heat map. So I want to make sure that not only am I finding where the API is early on and fiddling with it, but I understand the methods and the routes that make up the API, and that I do a full assessment on the API. There's actually a really good book that just came about API hacking that I have sitting on my desk. I guess I'd say it's really good. I've only read the first few chapters, but it's pretty awesome so far. Then I care about the account section, and most applications have an account section, right? Where you have your profile, where there's a lot of stored reflected data. And so I care a lot about that area of the application because it's a prime candidate for stored XSS. It's a prime candidate for data leakage, and it's where integrations are usually housed in the profile section or the configuration section. And those are integrations are normally when you set up an integration, usually it's URL based a lot of times between two sites or webhook based. And so that's really where I see a lot of SSRF and XSS attacks there. And then the last thing on my heat map is monitoring the site for errors. And this is something I don't see a lot of people do, but as I'm doing my fuzzing and crawling and I'm throwing content discovery lists at stuff, if I can get it to go through burp and I start seeing errors, I really want to pay attention to what caused these errors because it's going to give me contextual information about the application. So now that burp has a built-in logger, you can really filter, by errors and, just look at the requests and see what caused that error. Was it a meta character? Was it like too big? What happened there? And understand that, what happens if I do that 100 times in a row? Or like why did that meta character, cause an error? And what was given in the error was, what debug information in the error page was given back. There's a lot of questions around errors that are really important, and a lot of people just don't pay any attention to them. So, but really, errors give you a lot of juicy information in your testing. All right, the almost last section is parameter analysis. So several years ago, I did a project called Hunt at BugCrowd, and what this went is it went across all of the vulnerabilities. We anonymized them, and basically only took two keys out of them, which was the parameter that was existing in the submission and um, and the bug class, basically. And then we did a statistical analysis of which parameters were most likely vulnerable to which type of vulnerabilities. And to this day, this remains one of my testing superpowers. It gives me some semblance of priority to test in huge applications, right? Like the Salesforce example that you're looking at hundreds or maybe thousands of parameters or endpoints to fuzz for certain types of vulnerabilities. This is the superpower that lets you understand where to go looking. And probably the most important part of this presentation, and I don't know if a lot of people do it. I do it, and I've made a ton of money off of this prioritization that it gives you. And so we did this project, and you can see on the right-hand side the IDOR list of some of the parameters that are most likely vulnerable to IDOR, ID, user account, and contextually they make sense, right? At least in the English language, they make sense. So since Hunt's inception many years ago, there have been other projects that have attempted to do this, but with smaller data sets, with the XSS.com data set and with HackerOne's public disclosures. A lot of these have been ported to GF pattern files, basically JSON files with lists of these parameters. And remember, it's not just parameters here that we could look for. These could be routes as well. And so GF is an awesome grep tool made by TomNomNom. It's like grep on steroids, and you can feed it lists to grep out patterns. And so that's an example on the left. Indian Leet has built in his project a whole bunch of GF patterns, some of which are from Hunt and some are from other places. And you can basically feed it a giant list of URLs that you've seen, and it'll give you back a report based on the pattern saying, here's these 50 that have these parameters, and they're most likely vulnerable to, in this example on the left, SQL injection. And so that gives you a prioritized place to fuzz all those parameters and those links. So to be honest, there's a whole bunch of these projects that have patterns that are kind of copied off each other. I don't know where the data came from. A lot of them are stolen verbatim from Hunt. Some of them are from these other data sets. And so I plan to basically redo just the parameter section of that hunt tool we released a long time ago that did this analysis in burp. But I just plan to redo the patterns that GF can use pretty soon. So I am going to take clean it all up and also add some new sources that I've been parsing this week. Keep an eye out for jhaddix/sus_params on GitHub. That's where it'll be. And I'll have both verbatim lists of parameters as well as GF pattern JSON files for you to use with that. So this parameter analysis right now can really only be done on the command line with the tools we were talking about with GF because Hunt is unmaintained and broken. I don't know the time to fix it right now. Nor do I have the skill set really. It was built by a friend of mine. The scaffolding was built by a friend of mine. I did the data analysis work. And so you can look into a paid tool that'll do this called Burp Bounty. It has most of the Hunt and other data sources parameters in there. It's a paid tool, though it's a paid extension to Burp. It does much more than this parameter analysis. It also allows you to build your own scanner checks in Burp very easily. I love this tool. I think it's well worth the $60 that they charge for it. It's also got some scan checks in there built in. So I think it's really good, but not everybody can afford $60 for an extension to Burp. I totally get that. Hopefully someone will pick up Hunts and fix it and add the new data sources, but right now you probably end up doing a lot of this on the command line unless you have Burp Bounty Pro. All right. Whoa. That's a lot of stuff. Okay. Yeah, so that's a lot of stuff. And you're probably wondering, like, how do I keep track of all this stuff? You've done stuff on the command line, you've done stuff in Burp, and like also there's some notes and questions you're supposed to be asking yourself, what does this look like, right? And so that's totally fair to ask. So I'm going to show you 2/3 of the methodology that we talked about here in a mind map. I'm a big mind map fan. You can see here that I've done it for Tesla. So I started off with tech, which we started off the presentation with via the browser extensions we talked about. All that information's here for my reference when I'm testing this site. For pre-manual testing automation, I wasn't going to hit tesla.com with nuclear jails, so you can see the little no here. I did do a port scan with Nabu, only standard ports open. For content discovery, I used this Drupal one because the plugin said that it was Drupal, although this is an old version of Drupal's mapping, so I might want to do a new one pretty soon. I also used one of the generic lists here. I think I used HP archive directories, and then I used GAU as well. And then I also parsed, which I didn't note here, which I can end right now. I parsed the mobile application as well. Yeah. Okay, so all these are in text files on my VPS, which I can feed to Burp later. So that's good. I asked myself, how does the app pass data? It's a hybrid. It uses both parameters in some sections of the application as well as an API. The API, when I went to change account settings, was here at a Tesla account profile settings API. How does it talk about users? Well, it didn't directly have a UID on Tesla.com, but tightly integrated into regular Tesla was Tesla.com was shop.tesla.com. And there's an endpoint there, user status, that once I was logged in, I looked through my Burp history, and I think I used the Burp search for UID or UUID. I tried both, and I found one that had UID, which referenced my username here. You can see my email ID. Am I authenticated? Yes. And here is my UID. Does it have multi-tenancy or user levels? Remember, I'm just having this discussion with myself. So Drupal should have an admin role, but they've hidden the login, somewhere of the Drupal login. If that's even a right fingerprint, I think it is, but I'm not sure. I'll have to investigate it more. Does the API have multi-tenancy or user levels? Kind of. I mean, I'm guessing that the API will have access to a lot of people's data on the shop side. That's usually how an API works. So I'll have to spend more time looking there. Does it have a unique threat model? Not for Tesla.com or shop.tesla.com. I think those are pretty standard threat models, but for the mobile app that controls functions of the car and does things with the roof and can mess up the console, Yes, it possibly has a unique threat model in the mobile app URLs that I pulled out using the tool earlier. How does the app handle XSS or output encoding? Output encoding in Drupal is like pretty default and well standardized in Drupal 9. I still need to check the APIs. You can see I make typos in my notes all the time. CSRF, the tokens are in the headers and they're applied everywhere so far that I've seen, so nothing there, but I want to make sure I test the API and shop endpoints and subdomains as well to make sure that CSRF is being handled correctly there. I haven't done that yet. I Googled some research on bugs, which we talked about earlier in the presentation, so that I could reference them later. Here's the links. In my heat map, the profile section, which is here, I've just copied down the links so I know where that is. And then there's also the API here. And then no uploads that I've seen yet for Tesla.com. Not sure about shop.tesla.com. They're all very interchangeable. In fact, even auth is a third domain that does the authentication and it all gets passed around. And then I haven't done, I'm running currently parameter analysis for everything right now. So this is how I track, and this gives me a great launching point for my manual testing. And I now have a holistic, kind of look and feel and good kickoff place for the rest of my testing. So hopefully I've given you a lot to think about. And so what's next for this presentation? I went over a little bit. Sorry about that. Basically, the next version of this, I'm going to take a lot of community feedback, put more into it. I want to do a full workshop where I do the whole process live using all the tools, show people how I pass data around between my VPS and my burp and everything like that. And then I have to do the next version of the Bug Hunters Methodology Recon Edition, version 5. So that is the Bug Hunters Methodology application analysis. Hopefully there was some tips and tricks in there, some tools, some stuff that helped you. Sorry I went over a little bit, and I hope everybody has a wonderful conference. Thanks, NahamCon, and I'll talk to you later.